Nikola Tesla believed he had heard a message from another world. Not a metaphor, not a theory, an actual signal. He detected it in 1899 while working alone in a laboratory in Colorado Springs. He spent the rest of his life defending what he heard. And more than a century later, scientists still cannot say with complete certainty what reached his receiver that night. Here is what we know. It was late in the evening. Tesla was running routine monitoring work, mapping the electrical environment of the Earth as a baseline for his wireless transmission experiments. He was not searching the sky. He was not pointing an antenna toward the stars hoping for contact. He was doing careful, methodical work when the signals arrived uninvited. They came in pulses, ordered pulses, repeating at regular intervals in a pattern that matched nothing in months of recorded data. Not lightning, not magnetic disturbance, not any atmospheric phenomenon Tesla had previously catalogued. His receiver was among the most sensitive instruments on Earth at that moment, built by his own hands, designed to detect faint electrical disturbances from hundreds of miles away. Whatever was producing these pulses was not coming from hundreds of miles away. Tesla wrote about it the way an engineer writes. No exaggeration, no drama, pulses arriving in groups, consistent intervals, a pattern that suggested, in his own careful words, a source of intelligence. He became, by his own account, almost certain the signals had originated beyond the Earth's atmosphere. That conclusion would follow him for the next 44 years. Now here is what made this impossible to simply dismiss. Tesla was not a fringe inventor. He was the man whose electrical system was already powering entire cities. His patents were the foundation of the modern electrical world. When a man with that record said he had detected something extraordinary, the scientific establishment could not ignore it. But they also could not verify it. His Colorado laboratory was temporary. Within months, it would be dismantled and the instruments sold to cover debts. The original signal logs, his position notes, his observation records, his personal correspondence about what he heard, survived only in fragments. Incomplete, unverifiable, impossible to reconstruct with the precision that scientific confirmation required. Which left the question exactly where Tesla had found it. Something arrived in that laboratory in the Colorado mountains in the winter of 1899. Something ordered enough that one of the most disciplined scientific minds of the era stopped his work, checked his instruments twice, and concluded he was not alone in the universe. What he actually heard would take the world more than 50 years to even begin explaining. And the explanation, when it finally came, arrived from a direction nobody expected. Tesla returned to New York in the spring of 1900, carrying two things. The first was a wireless transmission theory he believed was about to change the world. The second was a signal claim so extraordinary he knew releasing it carelessly would cost him everything he had spent his career building. He had earned that career the hard way. He came to America in 1884 with almost nothing. Within a decade, he had defeated Thomas Edison in the most consequential technological argument of the 19th century, proving that alternating current could power a civilization more efficiently and safely than anything Edison had built. By the mid-1890s, his system was lighting Niagara Falls, powering Buffalo, and illuminating the Chicago World's Fair for 27 million visitors who had never seen electric light before. But Tesla was not interested in consolidating what he had built. He was already thinking about something larger. He believed electricity could be transmitted without wires, not across a room. Across continents. He believed the Earth itself could function as a conductor and that a properly designed tower could send both communication signals and usable power to any point on the globe freely, without a single connecting cable. To his peers, it sounded like a man losing his grip on practical science. To Tesla, it was simply the next step. That ambition brought him to Colorado Springs in May of 1899. A local businessman named Leonard Curtis arranged something that made the whole operation possible: free electrical power from the Colorado Springs Electric Company. Tesla used it immediately. He built a large wooden laboratory topped with a retractable roof and a central antenna mast rising nearly 60 feet into the mountain air. Inside, he installed a magnifying transmitter of his own design, capable of driving electrical oscillations powerful enough to push current through the ground itself. The surrounding town noticed immediately. Sparks jumped spontaneously from metal objects near the laboratory. Local ranchers reported horses refusing to cross certain patches of ground, sensing the charge moving through the soil beneath them. On at least one occasion, Tesla's experiments knocked out electricity across the entire town. The Colorado Springs Gazette reported the incident without quite knowing how to categorize what was happening on the edge of their city. Tesla barely paused. He was running experiments nobody had attempted before, at power levels nobody had tried, in a facility he had designed specifically to test whether the Earth itself could carry a signal. His monitoring instruments ran continuously, recording atmospheric electrical activity around the clock. And it was during this routine monitoring, not during a dramatic high-voltage experiment, not while deliberately scanning the sky, that the signals interrupted his data. That detail matters more than most accounts acknowledge. Tesla was not searching for extraterrestrial contact. He had no reason to expect it. He was doing the kind of careful baseline work that serious scientists do before attempting anything larger, which made what arrived in his receiver that autumn significantly harder to explain away as wishful thinking or confirmation bias. He stayed through the winter, continued his observations, filled his notebooks with data he believed no one had collected before. And then he made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He decided to build the tower that would prove everything. What he did not yet know was that while he had been working in isolation in the Colorado mountains, a young inventor in England had been quietly preparing to make that tower irrelevant before the first foundation was ever poured. In December of 1901. Guglielmo Marconi stood on a frozen hill in Newfoundland and listened. 3 clicks, faint, unmistakable. The Morse code letter S, transmitted from Cornwall, England, over 2,100 miles away. Marconi announced the first transatlantic wireless transmission. Newspapers celebrated him within hours. Governments recognized the implications within days. He was 27 years old and suddenly the most famous inventor on Earth. Tesla made a mistake that may have cost him everything. He assumed the patent record would speak for itself. Marconi's system relied on 17 patents. 12 of them had originally been filed by Tesla. The frequencies, the circuit configurations, the fundamental architecture, Tesla had documented and registered all of it years earlier. He said so publicly. He expected the scientific community to acknowledge it. Almost nobody printed it. The patent dispute entered the courts and stayed there for 4 decades. It would not be resolved until 1943, the same year Tesla died, when the United States Supreme Court quietly ruled in his favor. By then, Marconi had been dead for 6 years. The Nobel Prize he received in 1909 had never been reconsidered. The history books had already been written, and Tesla's name was not in them. But the patent war was only the first wall closing in. Tesla had begun construction on Wardenclyffe Tower on the north shore of Long Island, a 200-foot structure topped with a 55-ton copper dome, financed by the banker J.P. Morgan. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of something world-changing. Then Tesla made a second mistake. He told Morgan what he was actually building. Not a transatlantic telegraph to compete with Marconi, a global network. A facility that would transmit electrical power itself, freely, to any receiver anywhere on Earth. Morgan's response was immediate. He withdrew his financial support. The question he reportedly asked was simple and devastating. If power could be transmitted freely to anyone anywhere, where exactly would the meter go? Each month after that, the unfinished tower stood, exposed to the Atlantic wind, while workers drifted away and bills accumulated. Investors stopped returning calls. The facility Tesla believed would change civilization was quietly dying on the Long Island shoreline, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Then his signal claim resurfaced at the worst possible moment. In 1902, the British scientist Lord Kelvin visited the United States. Kelvin had established the absolute temperature scale. He was among the most respected scientific voices alive. American journalists asked him directly about Tesla's Colorado signals. Kelvin was measured but pointed. He suggested that if Tesla had detected anything genuine, the most probable source was not Mars, but a closer body. He stopped well short of endorsing the extraterrestrial interpretation. What his careful skepticism accomplished was to keep the question alive in scientific circles, while making clear that Tesla had not provided evidence sufficient to support his conclusion. Tesla did not have that evidence. His Colorado instruments were gone. His signal logs were incomplete, and without independent verification, his claim existed in the worst possible position, too significant to dismiss, too undocumented to confirm. But here is what nobody told Tesla. In 1899, the same year he was running his Colorado experiments, a physicist named Carl Ferdinand Braun was conducting wireless transmission tests in Germany. Braun's equipment operated at frequencies that could theoretically produce electrical disturbances detectable at considerable distances under unusual atmospheric conditions. Some researchers have since raised the possibility that what Tesla detected was not extraterrestrial at all, but an early European wireless transmission carried across the Atlantic, arriving in Colorado without any identifying signature. Tesla never knew this was possible. The timelines were not connected until long after his death, which meant the signal stayed exactly where it had always been, real enough that a careful scientist could not dismiss it, unexplained enough that no careful scientist could confirm it. And the answer, when it finally came, would not arrive from another inventor. It would not arrive from a physicist. It would not arrive from anyone searching for the answer at all. It would come from a telephone company trying to fix static. Carl Jansky was 22 years old when Bell Telephone Laboratories handed him a problem nobody considered particularly important. Transatlantic phone calls were being disrupted by radio interference. Bell needed to know where it was coming from. Jansky built a large rotating antenna in Homedale, New Jersey, a skeletal wooden frame mounted on 4 Ford Model T wheels so it could turn a full circle, and began mapping every source of radio noise he could identify. He expected lightning, electrical equipment, man-made interference. He found all of those, and then he found something that stopped him completely. A persistent hiss, faint but consistent, arriving from a fixed point in the sky that did not move with the sun, did not match any known terrestrial source, and repeated on a cycle of exactly 23 hours and 56 minutes, the precise rotation period of the Earth relative to the stars. It took Jansky over a year to be certain. When he was certain, he traced the signal to its origin. It was coming from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. He published his findings in 1933. A telephone company engineer doing commercial research had just discovered that the universe itself was broadcasting. Natural radio signals, constant, arriving at the Earth's surface from across the galaxy, passing through the atmosphere, detectable by anyone with a sensitive enough receiver. They had been arriving for billions of years, before any human instrument existed to hear them. Tesla was still alive when Jansky published. 77 years old, living alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel. When asked about the discovery, he responded without hesitation. Space was full of signals, he said, and the Earth had always had the capacity to receive them. He was right about that. But Jansky's discovery did something more important than validate Tesla's instinct. It opened a door that had been sealed since 1899. If the center of the galaxy was producing detectable radio emissions, then a sensitive receiver in the Colorado Mountains 34 years earlier could plausibly have captured naturally occurring cosmic signals without Tesla or anyone else having the framework to understand what they were. The science to explain what he heard simply did not exist when he heard it. Then, more than 50 years after Tesla's death, scientists found something that sounded disturbingly similar to what he had described. In 1955, two Cornell University astronomers named Kenneth Franklin and Bernard Burke were conducting a routine survey of cosmic radio sources when they detected a powerful repeating signal they could not immediately identify. Strong, rhythmic, arriving in regular bursts that suggested, to an instrument without context, something ordered and deliberate. When they traced it, the answer was Jupiter. The largest planet in the solar system was generating natural radio bursts produced by the interaction between its powerful magnetic field and its volcanic moon Io. The bursts were real, consistent, detectable from Earth, with relatively modest equipment. And they arrived in rhythmic repeating patterns that, to a receiver in 1899 operating without any framework for cosmic radio, could reasonably have appeared intentional. Tesla had named Mars as his most likely candidate. He was wrong about the source. But researchers, who later examined the geometry of the Colorado observations, noted something that had been overlooked for decades. During the autumn and early winter of 1899, the exact period Tesla described, Jupiter's position in the night sky placed it in direct alignment with the orientation of Tesla's receiving antenna in Colorado Springs. Not proof. The gaps in Tesla's original position logs were too significant for certainty. But for the first time since that night in 1899, a coherent scientific explanation existed that fit the evidence Tesla had actually recorded. He had not heard a civilization. The evidence never supported that. But he had almost certainly detected something real, a natural cosmic radio emission arriving from beyond the Earth's atmosphere, received by an instrument he had built himself, interpreted through the only framework available to him at the time. He defended that signal for 44 years. He never retracted it. He never qualified it away. And he never lived to know how close to the truth he had actually been. The tragedy was not that Tesla was wrong. The tragedy was the distance between what he detected and what he could prove, and what that distance cost him. Nikola Tesla died on January 7, 1943. A housekeeper found him in his room at the New Yorker hotel. He had not been seen for 2 days. He was 86 years old, and he died with almost nothing, a small collection of personal belongings, a handful of unfinished manuscripts, and decades of notebooks the world had largely stopped reading. Within hours, agents from the Office of Alien Property arrived and seized everything. Every notebook, every document, every personal paper, carried out of room 3327 and taken to a secure government facility. The official reason was wartime security, but what the seizure also accomplished, whatever the intention, was to pull Tesla's records from public reach at the exact moment history was forming its final opinion of him. Most of those documents were eventually reviewed and released. Researchers found no functional weapon. What they found instead were the notebooks of an aging man who had spent his final years returning obsessively to 2 subjects: wireless power transmission and the signals he had heard in Colorado more than 40 years earlier. He had never stopped thinking about them. For decades after his death, the question sat unanswered. Then, in 1996, researchers decided to test Tesla's claim directly against modern science. A team at the University of Colorado conducted a systematic analysis of what a ground-based receiver in the Rocky Mountains in 1899 could have realistically detected. They were not trying to prove Tesla right. They were trying to find out what was physically possible given the equipment, the location, and the time of year. Their conclusion was careful but significant. Jupiter's radio emissions fell within the detection range of a sensitive receiver operating at the frequencies Tesla used. The autumn of 1899 placed Jupiter in a position consistent with the orientation of his antenna during the period he described. The signal characteristics he recorded, rhythmic, repeating, arriving in grouped bursts, matched the known pattern of Jovian radio emissions more closely than any other identified source from that era. They stopped short of certainty. The gaps in Tesla's records were too large for a definitive conclusion, but for the first time, a serious scientific analysis had looked directly at what Tesla claimed and found a plausible physical explanation that fit the evidence. Tesla had detected a real cosmic signal. He had interpreted it incorrectly, reaching further than the evidence could support. But the detection itself placed him among the earliest human beings to receive a radio emission from beyond the Earth's atmosphere using equipment he had conceived and built himself. He had conducted, without knowing it, one of the first acts of cosmic radio observation in recorded history. Carl Jansky received the credit. The field Jansky founded changed everything: pulsars, quasars, the faint background radiation left over from the origin of the universe, the ongoing search for signals that might indicate life elsewhere. All of it built on the same principle Tesla was working with in a wooden building in the Colorado mountains 34 years before Jansky pointed his antenna at the sky. Tesla preceded him without the tools to know what he had found. Wardenclyffe Tower was demolished in 1917. The copper and steel sold for scrap. The land sat empty for nearly a century until a public campaign in 2012 raised over $1 million in weeks to preserve the site. The tower will not be rebuilt, but the ground is protected now. In Colorado Springs, a small historical marker stands near where his laboratory once existed. Most people drive past without stopping. But the question Tesla was asking in that laboratory in the winter of 1899 is the same question being asked today by the largest radio telescopes ever constructed. Teams of researchers analyzing signals arriving from billions of light years away, their origin still not fully understood, still asking the same thing Tesla asked alone in the Colorado mountains with instruments he had built by hand. Are there signals out there, and are we sensitive enough to hear them? Tesla did not find the answer, but he was the first person to seriously believe the question was worth asking and to build something capable of listening. He spent 44 years insisting what he heard was real. He was not wrong about that. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Forgotten Echoes. Every day we return to the moments history almost forgot, the people who heard something no one else could explain, and the questions they left behind that still don't have simple answers.